Have you ever found yourself standing at the edge of something beautiful, something real, something that could transform your very existence, only to turn away at the precise moment when staying would change everything? There's a particular kind of tragedy that unfolds in the human heart, a dangerous pattern that repeats itself with the mechanical precision of a Swiss timepiece, yet with consequences far more devastating than any clockwork could ever deliver. This is the dangerous pattern avoidance repeat, and today we're going to dissect it with the precision of a surgeon and the wisdom of someone who has observed the human condition for far too many decades to count. You see, the avoidant heart is not simply afraid of love. Oh no, that would be far too simple, wouldn't it? The avoidant heart is afraid of the very thing it craves most desperately, like a man dying of thirst who refuses water because he's convinced it might be poisoned. They create elaborate fortresses of independence, not because they don't need connection, but because they need it so profoundly that the mere possibility of losing it feels like standing on the precipice of annihilation itself. But here's where it becomes truly fascinating, and where our minds play the cruelest tricks upon us. The human brain, in all its remarkable complexity, has this peculiar tendency to see patterns where none exist, to connect dots that were never meant to be connected. We call this patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in meaningless noise, and its close companion, the clustering illusion, convinces us that random events are actually part of some grand, predetermined design. For the avoidant soul, these cognitive quirks become the very chains that bind them to their loneliness. They look at their past relationships, their failed connections, their moments of vulnerability that ended in pain, and they see not the random chaos of human experience, but a clear pattern. Intimacy equals danger. Connection equals inevitable abandonment. Love equals loss. And so they craft their entire existence around avoiding these imagined certainties, never realizing that they're shadow boxing with ghosts of their own creation. What you're about to discover in the next few minutes will illuminate the dark corridors of the avoidant mind with startling clarity. We'll explore how these patterns form, why they persist with such stubborn tenacity, and most importantly, how they can be broken. Because, make no mistake about it, these patterns can be broken, but only when we understand the intricate machinery of self-deception that keeps them running. We'll delve into the stories that avoidants tell themselves, the elaborate justifications they construct, and the moments of profound choice that can either perpetuate their isolation or set them free. This matters because somewhere in your life, you've either lived this pattern yourself or watched someone you care about slowly disappear behind walls of their own construction. Let me tell you about Marcus, a brilliant architect who could design spaces that brought people together but could never quite manage to stay in one himself. Marcus had what you might call a gift for timing, specifically the gift of terrible timing. He had mastered the art of creating connection right up until the moment when that connection might actually matter. Picture this man, 43 years old, sitting in his impeccably designed apartment that somehow managed to feel both stunning and utterly devoid of warmth, staring at his phone after ending yet another relationship just as it began to deepen. Marcus had convinced himself that he could see the future with prophetic accuracy. Every woman he dated, he would study like a blueprint, looking for the inevitable flaws, the signs of future disappointment, the evidence that this too would end in the same painful way his childhood had taught him. All connections must end. His mother, brilliant but emotionally unavailable, had perfected the art of conditional love. His father, present in body but absent in spirit, had shown him that even when people stay, they can still leave you feeling utterly alone. And so Marcus developed what he called his early warning system. The moment Sarah mentioned wanting to spend more time together, he saw clinginess. When Jennifer suggested meeting his friends, he perceived an invasion of his carefully constructed independence. When Lisa simply asked how his day was with genuine interest in her voice, he detected the suffocating tentacles of emotional dependence beginning to wrap around his freedom. But here's where the story becomes truly heartbreaking, and where patternicity reveals its cruel deception. Marcus wasn't actually seeing patterns, he was creating them. His brain, desperate to protect him from the vulnerability of genuine connection, was taking random data points and weaving them into a narrative of inevitable doom. Sarah's desire to spend time together wasn't clinginess, it was love. Jennifer's interest in his friends wasn't an invasion, it was inclusion. Lisa's question about his day wasn't suffocation, it was care. The clustering illusion had convinced Marcus that his experiences were proof of some universal truth about relationships, when in reality they were proof of nothing more than his own unconscious commitment to confirming his deepest fears. He would unconsciously choose women who weren't quite right for him, then point to their incompatibility as evidence that he was wise to keep his distance. He would create situations where his partners felt shut out, then use their resulting frustration as proof that they were too demanding. It was a masterpiece of self-fulfilling prophecy, executed with the unconscious precision of a master craftsman. The tragic irony was that Marcus was actually extraordinarily capable of love. In quiet moments, when his guard was down, he would reveal depths of tenderness and insight that left his partners breathless. But the moment he realized he had revealed too much, the moment he felt the stirring of genuine need for another person, the shutters would come down with frightening speed. He would find reasons to create distance, excuses to pull back, justifications for why this relationship, like all the others, was ultimately doomed to fail. I watched this pattern play out with 3 different women over the course of 2 years, each time with variations so subtle that Marcus never recognized he was essentially directing the same play with different actors. The script was always the same: initial attraction, careful connection, growing intimacy, the first stirrings of real vulnerability, then the gradual but inexorable withdrawal disguised as reasonable caution or incompatibility or simple lack of time. Marcus had become a master of the art of leaving before he could be left, of ending things before they could really begin, of protecting himself so thoroughly from the possibility of pain that he had also protected himself from the possibility of joy. Now, you might think this is simply a story about fear, and you wouldn't be wrong. But it's more complex than that, because Marcus wasn't conscious of his fear. He genuinely believed he was making rational decisions based on clear evidence. He thought he was being smart, protecting himself from obvious red flags, choosing freedom over the compromises that relationships require. He had no idea that his brain was playing elaborate tricks on him, convincing him that random coincidences were meaningful patterns, that isolated incidents were part of a larger, threatening design. So how does one break free from this insidious cycle? How does the avoidant heart learn to stay instead of run, to trust instead of analyze, to love instead of protect? The answer lies not in fighting the pattern, but in understanding it so completely that its power begins to dissolve. First, and this is crucial, you must learn to recognize patternicity in your own thinking. When you find yourself saying, "This always happens," or "People always do this," or "Relationships always end this way," stop, breathe. Ask yourself, am I seeing an actual pattern, or am I connecting dots that don't actually form a meaningful picture? The human brain is remarkably good at finding patterns, even in random data. In fact, if you show people a series of completely random events, they will begin to see patterns within minutes. This is not wisdom, this is simply how our brains are wired. The antidote to patternicity is what I call curious questioning. Instead of accepting your first interpretation of events, become genuinely curious about other possible explanations. When your partner wants to spend more time with you, instead of immediately labeling this as clinginess, ask yourself, what else could this mean? Perhaps it means they enjoy your company. Perhaps it means they're falling in love. Perhaps it means they see something in you worth pursuing. The goal is not to force yourself to believe the positive interpretation, but simply to acknowledge that multiple interpretations exist. Second, you must learn to distinguish between actual incompatibility and manufactured incompatibility. This requires brutal honesty with yourself about your own role in relationship dynamics. Are you ending relationships because of genuine fundamental differences in values and life goals? Or are you ending them because intimacy feels dangerous and your brain is helpfully providing you with reasons to run? The difference is often subtle, but it's there if you're willing to look for it. Here's a practical exercise that can illuminate this distinction. Before you make any major decision about a relationship, write down 3 reasons why this person might be wrong for you and 3 reasons why they might be right for you. Then, for each reason in both categories, ask yourself, is this based on observable facts, or is this based on my interpretation of facts? Is this about what's actually happening, or about what I'm afraid might happen? Third, you must learn to tolerate uncertainty without immediately converting it into certainty through the creation of negative narratives. Uncertainty is the natural state of all human relationships. We never know for certain how things will turn out. The avoidant mind, desperate for control and predictability, often deals with this uncertainty by deciding in advance that things will turn out badly. This creates a false sense of certainty and control, but at the cost of genuine connection. Learning to sit with uncertainty requires practice, like developing any other skill. Start small. When your partner is quiet, resist the urge to immediately decide what their silence means. When they seem distant, don't instantly conclude they're losing interest. When they want to talk about the future, don't automatically assume they're trying to trap you. Simply notice the uncertainty, acknowledge it, and see if you can exist in that space without immediately rushing to conclusions. Fourth, and this may be the most challenging aspect of breaking the avoidant pattern, you must learn to recognize and tolerate your own need for connection. Avoidant individuals often maintain their independence by convincing themselves they don't actually need other people very much. This is a profound self-deception. All human beings are wired for connection. It's as fundamental to our nature as the need for food or sleep. The avoidant person needs connection just as desperately as anyone else. They've simply learned to bury that need so deeply that they've lost conscious access to it. Reconnecting with your own need for intimacy requires patience and gentleness with yourself. It means noticing the moments when you feel genuinely happy in someone's presence and not immediately dismissing that happiness as weakness or dependence. It means acknowledging that the warmth you feel when someone truly sees and appreciates you is not a sign that you're becoming too attached. It's a sign that you're becoming human. Fifth, practice what I call present moment intimacy. Instead of constantly scanning for future problems or analyzing past patterns, commit to being fully present in moments of connection. When someone shares something meaningful with you, really listen. When someone expresses affection, really receive it. When you feel love stirring in your own heart, acknowledge it without immediately strategizing about how to protect yourself from it. This doesn't mean being reckless or ignoring genuine red flags. It means learning to distinguish between actual warning signs and the false alarms created by your own anxiety. A genuine red flag is consistent behavior that violates your core values or boundaries. A false alarm is usually a single incident or comment that your anxious mind interprets as evidence of future problems. Finally, understand that breaking these patterns is not about becoming someone different. It's about becoming more fully yourself. The capacity for love, for connection, for vulnerability that feels so dangerous to the avoidant heart is not foreign to your nature. It is your nature. You've simply learned to hide it so well that you've forgotten it exists. The path forward requires courage, yes, but not the kind of reckless bravery that throws caution to the wind. It requires the deeper courage of self-awareness, the willingness to question your own certainties, to examine your own patterns, to sit with discomfort without immediately acting to eliminate it. It requires the radical act of staying present in moments when every instinct tells you to flee. Remember Marcus? 6 months after our conversations, he found himself in a situation that would typically trigger his exit strategy. The woman he was dating, Catherine, had suggested they spend a weekend together at her family's cabin. His immediate response was a familiar cocktail of claustrophobia and analysis. Too much, too fast, too serious, too soon. The old Marcus would have found a reason to be busy that weekend, or perhaps would have gone but created enough emotional distance to ensure the experience felt safe but hollow. Instead, he paused. He recognized the pattern trying to engage. He asked himself the curious questions we had discussed. And then he did something extraordinary. He decided to stay present with his discomfort instead of managing it through withdrawal. He went to the cabin. He let himself enjoy Catherine's company without constantly monitoring his emotional temperature. He allowed moments of genuine intimacy without immediately calculating their cost. The weekend wasn't perfect. Real life never is. But it was real in a way that Marcus hadn't experienced in years. And for the first time in his adult life, he began to understand the difference between the patterns his mind created and the possibilities that actually existed. The dangerous cycle that had repeated itself so many times before finally found itself interrupted by the simple but profound act of conscious choice. This is the gift that awaits on the other side of these patterns. Not perfect relationships free from all risk or pain, but real relationships rich with genuine connection and authentic love. The very thing the avoidant heart has always craved but never quite dared to reach for. It's there, waiting just beyond the walls we've built to protect ourselves from it. All it requires is the courage to question our own certainties and the wisdom to stay present when every instinct tells us to run.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.